welcome to another episode of The Verdict. Today we're discussing some of the greatest stars in the UFC, as well as very strong and demanding fitness tests over Christmas breaks. But before we get into that, let me introduce to you our debating duo. First of all, we have Goran Paladin.
I feel like I'm about to get my ass handed to me. I'm sat next to Mike Angove, for goodness sake. Are we talking UFC, right?
We're talking UFC, yeah.
I may as well go home. How do I take this microphone off?
And of course, you've just mentioned him, our combat sport specialist, Mike Angove.
Yeah, Mike. Great to be here. Looking forward to getting into the coaching and the fitness testing, because that is an unwinnable argument.
Oh, great. Why am I here? I feel like if we're discussing UFC, I should be where you are and you should be where I am. Maybe I should host this thing for once.
No, you can sit next to Mike.
Okay, good.
I'll give you that one.
Wish me luck.
Okay.
Never give a sucker an even break, eh?
I'm definitely the biggest sucker here.
Okay, well, what's going to happen now, Mike, is what we usually do. I give a quick rundown on how this will all work. So basically, I will state the case, and you will say what side of the fence, you will briefly say what side of the fence you will be on. Then you'll be given the opportunity to put forward any evidence or any supporting comments that you have as to why you think your argument is the right one. You can rebut to each other, but just be a bit wary of time.
And don't get too aggressive, because I know you could probably kill me in about 10 seconds.
Can we have an arm wrestle as a tiebreaker?
Please do. Please do.
No. I'm not looking forward to this.
Okay. Just for you, Goran, first up,
yeah.
UFC. UFC 257 went down on the weekend, and Conor McGregor lost to Dustin Poirier in the main event. So the question is, does the UFC need Conor McGregor more than he needs them?
I'm saying that McGregor needs the UFC more, and it's all to do with the ego of the guy, the relevance of the organisation, and where it sits in MMA worldwide. And there might just be a little bit of the green-eyed monster involved as well, when he sees other people doing well and kind of taking his old spotlight away from him. And that's why he keeps on coming back time and again.
It depends on how you define it. And let's be clear, Conor does not need the UFC. He was literally on his own private yacht in Abu Dhabi while the rest of the world-class fighters are sitting in the W Hotel.
Wouldn't that be nice?
The question comes back to, as a fighter, does he have the passion within him? He will sell regardless of where he goes, particularly for his next 2 or 3 fights. He still has that value. He doesn't need to fight. It's his passion and his drive to want to be the top in the world. And yes, perhaps ego. But, you know, look, the UFC they'll get blood out of a stone for as long as they can. But Conor doesn't need to volunteer his blood, and right now he is.
A question for you, Mike. Why was it that the UFC paired him with Dustin in his return bout? Because if they wanted to build him up and be, you know, the Messiah has returned, they could have just given him some lightweight nobody, and you're still going to sell the pay-per-view because it's got Conor McGregor in it. And I suppose in giving him somebody like Dustin, who's ranked second in the lightweight division, they've said, we don't actually care. We've got other guys in the bank. It's basically given him a record in his last 6 fights of 3-3. Like, if you want to build the guy up, and if he means that much to the organisation, don't you want to give him a win in his first fight back in almost a year?
Well, what you've got to understand is the mechanics of MMA, and in particular the UFC. You don't get fed a steady diet of stiffs and corpses, you know, to get yourself back fighting fit. Also, there's probably the estimation of Conor's ability. Now, let's be clear, he won the first round. He rocked Dustin. Dustin is a southpaw. Conor is familiar with fighting southpaws. Obviously, the big trilogy with Diaz, and he can land that left hand of his. So look, it was actually not a bad matchup. It was just that Dustin Poirier was battle-hardened. He had a really good strategy. Conor is heavy on his lead leg, and he executed well. And MMA doesn't give you easy fights. You know, Ronda Rousey came straight back against Amanda Nunes. You know, that was lamb to the slaughter stuff. But really, I think, and all the analysts and experts around the world, probably 80% of them thought that Poirier was going to get tipped over because he can be a bit chinny. So, you know, Conor now has to go back and decide whether he has the passion to upskill slightly and compete at that level, which is the epitome of the sport.
I mean, the UFC, by giving him somebody as strong as Dustin, I thought that was sending a pretty strong message that we're not going to give you a jobber, for want of a better term. And that's what happened, correct me if I'm wrong, against Cowboy Cerrone, right? That's what he had.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
There was a huge outcry against Cowboy, Cowboy who was on a losing skill. Still a great fighter. But, you know, and you're always going to get a certain amount of criticism, but that was, look, there was a stiff that, you know, and he wasn't a stiff, that's disrespectful to Cowboy, but there was a guy who you're expected to beat and he put him away in 40 seconds. You know, and that is just how MMA runs. Again, you have to understand the difference. In MMA and in particular UFC, you fight the top guys all the time. A loss isn't as significant as it is in boxing. You don't get Deontay Wilder getting to 36-0 and then finally fighting someone who's half decent. You know, obviously Dan lost on the weekend, but let's remember Poirier has lost. Gaethje got knocked out by Poirier. Ferguson's on a 2-fight skid. You know, 6 months ago, things were very, very different. You know, so yeah, that happens in this sport, and what it is laying the gauntlet down is, can you guys get up and recover? And in that top 5, you're talking about millimetres and split seconds that make the difference at the epitome of the game.
Well, why does he keep going back to the UFC in particular? Because there are other organisations out there. I mentioned Bellator, ONE. If he's, and he has been quoted before as saying that he's bored with the opponents that UFC keep on putting in front of him. He's bored of them. It's probably why he's retired 3 times in the last 4 years. Why doesn't he go to one of those other organisations? And I go back to the point that I made earlier. I think it's the relevance of the UFC. It's a worldwide brand. It's the most recognised one of MMA. And so this is why he needs them more than they need him. And you've got guys like Israel Adesanya, who is not only, you know, he's walking the walk, he's talking the talk, he's doing everything. He's so marketable. And you know, I feel like that's why the UFC, that we're going, okay, all right, we'll put you with Dustin. You can take your licks, because we've got guys like Israel who are, they're on the way up.
So let's just revert back to what an athlete in his truest form wants to do. He wants to compete. He wants to be the top athlete, the alpha male or female, in the best league in the game.
So he can only get that high when he competes in UFC.
Now that's just a statement of fact. That's the nature of competition. That's not necessarily needing the UFC. It's more about, I want to achieve. I want to get to the pinnacle once again. He doesn't need to do that in the UFC. He could go to Japan. He could go to Bellator quite easily and get trolls and trolls of money. Yeah. Yeah. He's not fighting for money. So this is the thing.
Absolutely
I think
not. He's got all the money in the world.
We have to come back to. He is fired by a competitive spirit. Now we will see that spirit tested. But in practical terms, does he need the UFC? No, he doesn't. He could sail off on his boat and, you know, he'd be quite happy. But as an athlete, you know, it's no different from the Olympics. You want to compete at the Olympics as an amateur athlete.
And this is why I say he needs the UFC.
No.
Look, because you've made the point really well. He's an athlete. He wants to get in the octagon. He wants to trash talk someone. He wants to follow through on fight night. And he can't get that anywhere else. Not to the level that the UFC provides. Yeah, he could go to those other organisations, but in his heart of hearts, he would know that it's not the upper echelon. And
so what, what you're saying is, what you're actually saying is, it's not the UFC he needs. He needs competition at the highest level, and I'll grant you that. Okay, but the UFC is just a label. But any athlete wants competition at the highest level. Doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're an athlete with your salt, you want to beat the guys at the highest level. Right now, yes, that's the UFC. But it's not needing the UFC. It's just being an athlete, being a competitor and wanting to be considered the best in the world.
And that Manny Pacquiao fight was almost signed, sealed and delivered, but pretty much thanks to COVID didn't happen, right?
Well, look, I think what's going to happen now is, you get an idea of whether or not he's truly refocused on becoming number one again. And, talk is cheap, and we'll now see whether he's able to follow through that. I'd like to add that, you could also reverse that position that the UFC, if you'll notice, they had proper 12 whiskey,
all over the place.
All over the place.
So
there is a lot of commercial viability in having Conor there. And away from the competition point, there is still blood you can squeeze out of Conor, because there is still the question of he's effectively, been out of MMA consistently for 3 to 4 years, right? He's popped back in after 12 months and 40 seconds against Cerrone. Before that, it was 2 years out, and he came back at the top of the game against Habib and an exhibition joke against Floyd Mayweather. That's a long time away from the sport. It's a long time away from the day in, day out grind and the understanding of the hunger that you need. Before that, he was like Israel, he was like Anderson Silva, he was like a lot of guys who come up fighting 3-4 times in a year. And, so that is a question that still needs to be asked, and fans will go, well, if he commits himself, if he beats a couple of guys in the top 5 and gets back into that mode, can he get back to where he once was?
He's only 32. So there's still plenty of time, right?
Theoretically, he's in his prime.
Yeah.
What you have to go back to, though, is how much damage did the partying and the time off do? And in lighter weights, heavier weights tend to come into their prime sort of 28 to 36, but guys who are a little bit lighter, they tend to take a lot more punishment. And they tend to have their prime a little earlier. That's certainly in boxing parlance, and it's been the case generally speaking across most combat sports. But we'll see. He still looked sharp. He still looked like he had a lot of skills. He still looked like there's a lot of guys who are going to get knocked out. But if he doesn't learn how to leg check, we see that. We see that every weekend.
We might see an amputee in the next fight. His leg is gone.
Every weekend in a Muay Thai contest, you see a great boxer get smacked by a guy who only knows how to throw a right leg kick. So, Conor, learn to check.
You've been told by Mike. Listen to him.
He could probably teach you. Yeah. Okay, well, this is a bit of a landslide, Goran, I'm really sorry to say. But the other thing that I want to chuck in the mix is that for this fight, Conor McGregor was the favourite coming off, a year not fighting, and Dustin coming off wins. They've also put out that if they have a trilogy, that Conor would still be the favourite. So in saying that, the UFC, I think, would do everything in their power to hold on to this guy. So I'd have to side with Mike on this.
And the Nate Diaz fight.
And the Nate Diaz fight.
Oh, well, I tried.
It was a good crack.
Yeah, thaness, mate. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Not bad.
Just like Conor. It was a good crack.
It was a good go.
You're now on the downhill slide where we're going to talk about fitness testing, right?
Yeah.
Something Goran is very familiar with, right?
Oh, yeah, because I'm so fit. All the time. Yeah, what do they say at the Blues? Better never stops. So, I've taken that mantra and just applied it to my own life.
Excellent. Okay. So let's get on to case number 2. Athletes, should they be given a fitness pass in the off-season? Now, this is, of course, off the back of news coming out of the Silver Ferns camp of athletes being sent home because they have not met fitness requirements. So, should athletes be given a fitness pass during the off-season? Mike, where do you stand on this?
No.
Taskmaster.
I think we should throw it straight over to Goran because this is going to be a very, very difficult one to ask. But look, your athletes.
I'm going to go down 2-0 in this, aren't I?
God. Athletes, and you're paid to perform at the highest level. And if you're a professional athlete, your job is to make sure you're in suitable condition. And it doesn't matter what sport you're in. Of course, that's contextual. Where's your injury level? What are your benchmarks that you've achieved in previous seasons? How is your program periodised? Where do you sit in that? But those benchmarks are pretty clearly laid out. And having actually been part of the netball high performance camp over the holiday break, we got an indication of where those
Wait, you were there?
Are held. Yes.
Oh, great.
It's a big stitch up.
We were actually invited in to speak on establishing a high performance culture.
Nice.
So you're not going to get any argument from us. You know, you are paid to perform. Okay. Now, just because you may go off over the holidays and have 63 beers and 142 pizzas.
Mike, it was my 40th birthday.
Yeah, you don't look a day over 50. That's not impacting your ability to do the job. But if you went out last night, got lit, and came in hungover this morning and failed miserably,
which I did not,
like you are in this debate.
Well, I might be failing miserably in the debate, but I didn't get lit last night.
If that was impeded by your external behaviour, right, then your job would come under threat. As a professional athlete, it's not that I'm implying that you might have got lit, because of course you are a professional.
I don't drink much.
You would never do that. You would never go out, get hungover before a really important job and then come over.
Oh, hell no.
No, right. Okay, so he's already conceded the debate, basically.
Not really, no. So look, the point that has arisen about the netballers is that, look, they turned up on day one of camp, and you know, I'm not going to say that Nolene Taurua is doing things incorrectly, because she isn't. You know, she's the only person for that job, and I love whatever she's doing with that team. Long may it continue. I want to see them be world champions from here to eternity. But it's the first day of camp. You're 6 weeks out from your first test against Australia, and you send 5 girls home because they haven't met the standard required. And we're talking about a holiday period where you may not have had 64 beers and 12 pizzas in a day, but you know, you've let your hair down a little bit. And I'm sure these girls weren't miles away from the fitness goal that was set. And then the other side of it is, wouldn't you be better off if you were in the Silver Ferns management and the trainers to actually keep those girls on? Because clearly when they were away from the environment, they didn't get to that mark. So what, you're going to send them away and have them slip off even further? I would have thought, get the trainer out there, do a bit of overtime and get them up to speed under the umbrella of the Silver Ferns camp. That's just me.
What a miserable...
Well, hang on. Let me tell you a story, right? Let me tell you a story. And it's got nothing to do with sport, but there was a guy, I went to a wedding in Hawaii a few years ago, and it was like the guy was a Kiwi, the girl was an American, so we had the wedding in Hawaii so everybody could make it. Her brother is like hard out into training, you know, like he's constantly training. Amazing physique, it must be said, like incredible. You know, you could grate cheese on his abdominals. But it's your sister's wedding week, and we're all sitting in the pub. One day in the pub, people are having a beer, having a pizza, and this guy busts out of his backpack some rice and a steamed chicken breast. And I'm like, come on, man, just relax for once in your life. Have a bit of fun. Taste this wonderful pizza. I think it was like chorizo and mozzarella. It was beautiful. But he refused.
Oh,
I'm just like, it's sad, you're a robot.
Didn't your mum ever tell you that if your mates are going to go and jump off a cliff, perhaps you shouldn't join them? Look,
eating a pizza isn't the same as killing yourself.
Now let's be clear here. The test is 6 weeks away.
Yeah.
All right. You have a care of duty knowing that your test is 6 weeks away. Israel's fighting on March 6th.
Yeah.
Okay. Dan just fought on the weekend. We've got Alex Volkanovski fighting on March 27. Those guys trained through the holiday period knowing that in 6 to 8 weeks they were going to be fighting. That means when you turn up at the gym, you're not in a fat camp. You are doing skill development.
Were these girls
You are
fat?
working on strategy. You're able to keep up with the play of what is required to prepare. There is no argument that says that you can go and get yourself unfit and unable to attain the level that is required to operate at an international level. There's no argument, there's no way you can justify it. And just to the point of Are these guys allowed to go away and have a pizza and a beer? Of course they are. All athletes have that choice. Our athletes have that choice. But it becomes a balance. Again, if you're going to have 27 beers and 63 pizzas, perhaps that's not a good choice. Okay? If you aren't meeting your personal benchmarks,
as well.
and remember too that we operate like this. I know most of the All Blacks and the professional athletes across the different codes in New Zealand, they have access to their trainers. They have their program. It is periodised for them. It is spelled out what they need to do. Injury aside, or some kind of personal issue aside, there's no excuse to turn up not ready and unable to operate at the level your coach needs. Further to that, when you are operating an environment of high performance and excellence, which Nolene does, you have to set a benchmark. You can guarantee next time those guys are going to turn up fit and ready.
Does it matter who the person is? The reason I ask that is, what if Roger Tuivasa-Sheck turned up to Warriors pre-season training and he was carrying a little bit extra and his yo-yo test was down on what it was last year? Is Nathan Brown just going to go, sorry mate, head off home? I'm sure he'd probably have a bit of a joke, maybe chastise him, and then put him to laps around the field or running up and down sand dunes.
Just want to touch on this Netball New Zealand thing that you guys have done. I mean, was this a bit of what was involved in giving, kind of kōrero like this to them?
Yeah, look, essentially, we were invited in over the holiday period, Eugene, myself, and that was while Israel was overseas. So Israel did it was a Skype call or a team call or whatever, and came in. And look, the desire from Netball New Zealand was to understand our story and how we developed a high performance culture from not having a lot of support, not being a mainstream sport. To understand the 10, 20, 30 year story in this case of how that came about, to understand the leadership that Eugene provides across 5 or 6 world-class coaches, and that's something that Nolene and the rest of the top coaches in New Zealand were looking for, and hopefully we were able to provide that. And I think that's a good example of a coach who is willing to look outside the box or her box in particular, and look at what can we draw from other successful athletes. I mean, there's a huge difference between non-contact netball and MMA.
Non-contact.
I don't know. Have you seen what goes on in some of the defensive ends? Jeez.
Yeah, and but that's a sign of a great coach. And no doubt we weren't the only ones who were asked to come in. And any team, you should be looking at inspirational motivation from other high achievers, and that can be in business as well, because you will find a similar theme of excellence, of discipline, of being hard on oneself, of finding that internal intrinsic self-motivation, and I guess that's what Nolene did, and that's why she was the coach of the year, and why the netballers won the Supreme Award at the Hellbergs. And it's a great example of, I guess, in a sense, we were quite competitive at those Hellbergs, and I was one of the most vocal people in support of my own sport. But you set that aside, how do you learn from one another? And Nolene's a magnificent coach, so is Eugene. And so are a number of other coaches supporting the head coaches, so you can always learn something. Well,
thank you so much, Mike. I feel like this has turned into a great discussion and catch up with a good friend.
I almost forgot about the fact that I lost 2-0.
That's how good you are, Mike.
Yeah, you did.
Thanks for helping me forget.
You put up a reasonable scrap, to be fair.
Yeah.
You weren't given a lot to work with.
No. This is what I do. Yeah. You give me a little and I give you a lot. You're welcome.
All right, cool. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a little insight, a lot of interesting information, and we really appreciate having you on the show.
No problem. Been a pleasure being here. And well done, Goran.
Thanks, Mike.
It was a worthy challenge.
Yeah, I tried my
It's
hardest.
slightly breathless.
For all it's worth.
I need to do more work in the pre-season, Rav.
And well, for Goran and I, we'll be back, of course, next week, putting everything in sport on trial. Hei ko ngā mai.